Good morning. Welcome to the most exciting session of Cisco Live. We're talking about the future of SDN and NFV. Are you ready? So on the agenda side, I'm breaking things into three different groups. One is setting the stage, some context for SDN and NFV. I'm pretty sure all of you have done a lot of the sessions at Cisco Live already. So this is a summary version. And then I'm going to deep dive into a very wide spectrum of this industry in the SDN space. Is this about server virtualization, hypervisor virtual switch, or physical switch? What are the pros and the cons of different approaches? What are the Cisco's products doing this in different layers? And then finally, the future direction. I will do the same thing for NFV. What's the current status, state of the art? What are the Cisco's products? And then what's beyond the obvious? For instance, NFV is more about decoupling the networking functions away from the proprietary hardware. But is virtual machine the right or the only form factor for NFV? So my goal for this talk is really twofold. One, all of you are going to get additional perspective or insight into SDN and NFV. Each of you coming from a different industry, different background. Maybe you are in the telco service provider. Maybe you are from the enterprise. Maybe you are doing server admin, but now into the SDN. I can guarantee you, all of you will get additional perspective. The second one is a little bit harder. Potentially change your existing perspective. Now, two caveats. One, this is not about Cisco's comprehensive portfolio at all. And the second thing is it's not about roadmap. If it's a future direction, that means it's not proven. Roadmap is a little bit near-term stuff. So SDN and NFV is really dear to my heart for many reasons. I look back my past 15 years in this space. SDN was invented about 7, or at least the term was invented 7 or 8 years ago. But I have personally practicing SDN for forever. I'll tell you a little bit about my background here. Early days, I was at MCI UUNet in the heydays. And I saw at firsthand that configuring network was hard. But frankly speaking, it wasn't such a big deal because network was, at the time, designed to deal with a fairly static environment to begin with. Resilience of the network is far more important. Then I joined the VMware. I was one of the first engineers for VMware Hypervisor. And frankly speaking, I joined the VMware trying to be an operating system programmer. I'll tell you a story. 3 days after I joined the VMware, one of my colleagues gave me a device driver bug to fix because they knew I know a little bit about the networking. So I look at the device driver, 3COM device driver bug, and one thing that popped up into my mind was, this is not a device driver. This is actually a virtual switch. And the virtual switch concept was invented shortly afterwards. At VMware, I also saw it firsthand that this was 15 years ago. I was able to create snapshot, move around the virtual machine with mouse click. But really, to stand up an application with my own IT guys, it would take weeks. There's a huge discrepancy between my mouse clicks to instantiate the virtual machine to getting the virtual machine to be useful. Networking was in the way. So I started my networking virtualization journey at VMware. I ran the networking portfolio at VMware for about 10 years. And then I left VMware, I joined a startup because I saw that the network was in the way. One way to deal with that is, at the time, a lot of people were thinking about SDN OpenFlow. You can just make the network a lot more programmable. So all the problem will be solved. And I learned the hard way that it's not that easy. Making that programmable, making that flexible is just the starting point. No customers wanted to deploy this unless you actually have the resilience, you have the availability, you have the troubleshooting, you have the lifecycle management, all those issues solved. And then I joined Cisco, and a lot of my daily life is about SDN, NFV again. In the NFV space, there's service training stuff that's coming up. I will talk a little bit more. And in the SDN space, it's not just about SDN. It's about in different contexts. What if it's a hybrid cloud? Can your SDN solution be hybrid cloud proof? So let's get to what is the single most important driver behind SDN. You are in this room, you must have some opinion on this. I'm sorry? Automation? Flexibility? Scale? It's pretty much all of the above. It's to deal with the virtualized data center, CapEx, OpEx. The single most important driver behind SDN and NFV is really the agility. I think you mentioned the flexibility. It's the same thing. So why agility suddenly became such a big deal in the last few years? Like I said, I was at MCI WorldCom UUNet. Yes, configuring CLI was painful, but no one was thinking, okay, let's do networking completely differently. Why suddenly it's such a big deal? Well, the network was really designed for a very different context. Networking is always a means to an end. The means is technology. The end is the business context, the environment, what we are designing this network for. Network, TCP/IP network in particular, was designed for Cold War, nuclear war age. You can never assume that you know the other party is live or not. You can never assume there's a centralized entity for this entire network. You always have to learn. You always have to advertise what's going on because God knows what's happening for things on the other side. So it was really designed for a fairly rigid and a resilient environment. The requirement is fairly different. But we live in a very different age now. First, there is no, at least immediate threat of the Cold War or nuclear war. But more importantly, many of us live in the Facebook generation, where if I want something yesterday, rather than I give you 3 weeks, 3 months to prepare, to learn. So it's the rigid, resilient, resilience versus the rapid flexibility or agility. That's really the fundamental business difference between then and now. The pre-mobile cloud era and then the current mobile cloud era. So let's get to a little bit more details. What does that mean? In the pre-mobile cloud era, the network was designed for this small dot. Today, the requirement is drastically different. So let's get to each one of them. Speed. What is speed? I assume all of you know what speed means in the networking arena. For the last 30 years, speed really means speeds and the feeds. Whether 1 gig, 10 gig, 100 gig, that's speed. But today, the speed is completely redefined. Yes, the raw speed is still important, but it's just one of the 10 or 100 things people care about. People care about the speed from requirement to the product. I remember when I was at startup, Big Switch, was talking to an architect at one of the biggest service providers side. And he was telling me, for OpenFlow, he wanted to, from the moment he needs a feature to a product ready, he wants that to be a 3 weeks or 3 months kind of deal, rather than the traditional networking company would give you turnaround time is 3 years or 2 years. So customers' requirement on the speed from what they want to when the product shows up is very different. Now that's, again, just one out of another 20 things. What's next? You get a product, you need to deploy it. People's expectation is, I want to deploy that right away. So it's the provisioning time, the day 0. And then there's a day 1 provisioning. And then there's a day 2 troubleshooting. So all of that, people are in a hurry now. When I want something yesterday. So things are a lot more than the speeds and the feeds. Now, the business model has been changed on our customer side as well. Everything is moving towards X as a service, the consumption. Even the procurement speed is different. In the past, you go through PO, you go through a lengthy process. Now people expect everything can be just done on the browser with a mouse click. So the bottom line is the speeds, even for networking guys, for the networking product, for the consumer of the networking product, it means way more than just the raw speed. Whoever does the better speed in the raw speed, but doing poorly on other aspects, is not going to win the heart of the customer. So that's the speed. What is the span? Span of reach, right? So before, the data is a lot more localized. You can afford to say, I have a segment, VLAN, local area network, it's within that rack or within that data center or whatnot. That assumption can no longer be true. I'll give you 2 examples. One is the data is everywhere. Big data, analytical data. Oftentimes people, the front-end engine is here in this data center, and then the back-end data is somewhere in a different thousands of miles away, potentially. So the data locality can no longer be assumed. And the application is a lot more people-centric. And this is a global society, so you cannot assume the people is in the same area. So the segment, the network was designed in a way, VLAN, subnet this, subnet that. But suddenly the stretch, the span is completely out of whack. You cannot assume that here's a rack, here's a pod, and here's a network. You should assume that even the VLAN should span across the entire global space. And so really depends, and then that's one example. The other example is traditionally, network is to serve applications, right? Application oftentimes is monolithic. You have a monolithic applications, it's right there. Now, the trend is the monolithic applications is going away. Well, it's not completely going away, but the new application being written is less monolithic. It's more about stitching a lot of different microservices. And some of the microservices may be on Amazon. Even if no public network, public cloud, you may have microservices from different data centers. So as a networking guys,